Okay, welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch, and I hope you had a chance to look at the artwork that's emerging around the walls. A prolific artist, many blisters on his fingers, and he says it's just the coffee that keeps him going honest. But you can form your own judgments about how well he's captured what we've been doing and put some stickers on. That would be really helpful. I was originally asked to talk about the Social Work Task Force report, which is now almost exactly a year old, Building a Safe, Confident Future, it was called. The reason being that when we looked at social work practice in England and Wales, and bear in mind, those of you from Scotland or Australia or Canada, it might not be as bad and probably isn't. But when we looked at practice in England and Wales, we discovered all was not well. It wasn't just the Sun newspaper and the Daily Mail that thought social work was struggling, and it wasn't just students completing courses that were struggling that thought the profession was not really going to produce the best, and it wasn't just the odd employer. What we discovered was a significant amount of disquiet about many aspects of social work. Some of it, bear in mind things that have been said before today, some of it is about the practitioners. We discovered that when you look across the country, not everyone with the title social worker practicing as a social worker probably has the knowledge, skills and capacity, inner strength to be a social worker, particularly in a statutory setting. So there was something there about people coming into the profession and people moving through initial training that we thought we needed to have a good look at. But that's a really small minority, because the overarching impression as a social work task force that we got was that if everything was operating at the level of the best, then we wouldn't need the Social Work Task Force, we wouldn't need what is now the Social Work Reform Board. Because there's so much high quality practice, well supported, well supervised, people committed to their professional development in career structures which satisfy them. There is a lot of that in both public and independent sectors. But a really disproportionate number of local authorities as employers in particular, and I speak as a someone who's spent the last 30 years in local authorities. I have to take some responsibility as a, I've had 3 different director posts and 2 assistant director posts over the last 15 years. I have to accept that I'm part of the problem, and local government as the major employer of social workers has to accept its part. But also we had to push things back to the profession, to the individuals, and not just at the level of practice, but at the level of supervision, to make sure things improved in a sustainable way. I'm going to run through a little bit of what we found, starting with what we were set up to do, and conclude with some suggestions about what the English and Welsh Social Work Reform Board really needs to have in part in its first report, which is due out in a few weeks, I hope. Actually, I think I'll start, before I go into my first slide, I'll just reflect a couple of the things that were said to me as part of our review around the country. I don't know if anyone here came to any of the regional events. A lot of the Social Work Task Force was based in and around London, so anything north of St Albans, they said, oh, Andrew can do that. So Sunderland, Manchester, Leeds, didn't make it, it's north, get up there. So I actually got to meet quite a lot of people scattered around most of the country as part of the task force. And two things really stuck in my mind. One person in a plenary session at the end of one of our sessions said he'd qualified as a social worker in Holland 30 years ago, and then the minimum qualification level was master's level. And he'd come to practice over here, and had practiced most of his career over here and managed over here. And basically what he'd seen over the last 20 years was the process of infantilization of social work. interesting word to use. And it wasn't just the last government that introduced managerialism into social work. It wasn't just the last government that tried to establish standards and performance and so on. It was largely government-driven, but we all played a part in it. And what we did was take away a lot of the decision-making areas from social workers by requiring a sort of reporting and recording system that drove everything else. And I thought the theatre company this morning summed it up so well in that the 2 minutes in the middle around the 7-day target. And that's the other thing I was going to mention, where I hold my hand out. I was part of the working party that oversaw the development of the National Framework for Assessment of Children and Families. And I was part of the discussion around timescales. Okay, you are listening, yeah, right. I just thought you'd all fallen asleep for a moment there. And the conversation we had in the room it was then Department of Health, was, if you were a child or a family in crisis and you wanted to hear whether someone in your local social services department took you seriously and thought you had a problem they could work with, how quickly would you want a response? If you went to your GP, you'd expect to know pretty well on day one, so we'll give it a week. It would be a reasonable sort of target, wouldn't it, to find out if someone took your problem seriously in the first week. And then, if you had a complex problem that needed a bit of thought, assessment, reassessment, hypothesis testing, and all the rest of it, what would be a reasonable timescale to work out whether you were going to get a sort of medium to long-term intervention? And we thought about 6 weeks would be reasonable. And there has never been any evidence produced that I'm aware of that took those off the top of our head views and said, if you do it more quickly or more slowly, is it more effective? But they got enshrined in, Ofsted's sack effectively lead to the sacking of staff as a consequence of failing to comply with something which we thought was a good idea for, on average, by and large. If you had a problem, how quickly would you want a solution? So what we've got to get back to, I think, as Eileen said, is thinking sensibly about some of these targets. We shouldn't operate in a sort of information-free, feedback-free world. But what we shouldn't do is attribute to things like timeliness any more power than it deserves. And that's not much, frankly. It's more like good manners than good practice. So there were a couple of things I thought I'd mention. And the third was ICS, the Integrated Children's System. I'd led the task force's review of ICS, and we now have a much more relaxed attitude to it. It's difficult to work it into the system. We knew it would be, because there was never going to be a day in the life of the social work task force when we said the Integrated Children's System, because it is now the entire recording system for social workers, because you couldn't do that and something else, let's face it, you can't just stop doing it. And Eileen said she could recall the days when social workers didn't have to use it and practice was not all good. I can recall that too, and I can remember Herbert Laming, as he was going out as Chief Inspector at the Department of Health, Chief Inspector of Social Services, lambasting local government and social work for very poor recording. So, we've got to look at how we record, how we do it reliably, how we use recording, but let's not ever get back to the belief that you can drive good practice through a system that requires you to follow step by step a set process. ICS, the Common Assessment Framework, and the National Framework for Assessment of Children and Families are all frameworks with merit. What you need to feed into them is professional content. None of them was ever designed in the early stages with professional content. That's for you as practitioners and supervisors to determine on a case-by-case basis. You need to know, going back to systems theory, what it is you're looking at and what you need to bring to bear to deal with those issues. And the task force wanted to make sure we made that message very clear, that we support framework development because you then get some sort of consistency, but maximized the power of professional decision-making within that, and professional decision-making requires supervision, particularly when you're dealing with child protection and similar areas. So going back to the task force, what was it we were trying to do? Well, it wasn't to solve the problems of Haringey Council. It was never that. It was an acknowledgement in both Department of Health and then DCSF that social work was in crisis. Some work had been done which, I'll just move that slightly so I can see the screen. Some work had been done by both departments in 2008, which looked at everything around the profession. And the question I asked when I got involved right from day one was, how did we as a nation ever get in this position? Because I can remember what it was like in 1979, and if we got back to there, we'd be doing okay. But so what's happened in the last 30 years that's led to such a lack of confidence, such a lack of clarity about what social work is there to do? What is it that is going on and has been going on? Because if we don't understand how we've gone from a developing, emerging profession, I did the essay in 1979 on is it a profession or a semi-profession, and all that stuff. And how did we get from there to now, where we've got armies of people disempowered, disenfranchised, ticking boxes, and thinking that that's how you resolve the problems of children and families? Because if we don't understand the complexity of the journey we've been on, we won't be able to get it right. And given that we were supported by 2 government departments, 2 ministers personally signed off the project, how do we start dealing with this issue of what is the point of social work in modern society? How do we get to the sort of consistency of practice, sort out something about the level of satisfaction in graduates and employers? Because the work that was done identified that a third of social workers at the point of qualifying said they hadn't been equipped to do their job. That's rather a lot, when 98%, I think it was, of teachers said they'd been well equipped by their training to do their job. And they're both complex jobs. So how do we get to that from there to a better place was the challenge we gave ourselves. And until we start dealing with that, we're not going to get the workforce that we need, stable, experienced, with career paths and progression and so on. Ministers were very clear, and you've heard the message, that the government, last government, and Tim Lawton has echoed this on the children's side. I haven't heard Andrew Lansley say anything, but Tim Lawton, with the lead in the Department for Education, has echoed the fact that he fully supports the view that social work needs to be high quality, high status, and attract the best people, the most resilient, with the right intellectual ability and the right emotional intelligence to do this job. And he's been committed to seeing through the implementation of the task force recommendations